Okay, thank you very much and welcome to today's training. This is Exam Insights for the English Literature 4ET for the IGCSE. So welcome to today. For me, it's morning here in London, but of course this is an international qualification. So welcome whatever time of the day you're joining us. This is a very short course, it's only 1 hour. We have a number of resources for you and we'll pop that, it should be in the resources button on the bottom right hand side, but we'll pop a link into the chat so that you can access it from there. So there are 5 resources for today. SO1, which is a copy of these slides, SO2, which is the examiner report for paper 1, SO3, which is the examiner report for paper 2, and I'll be referring to those 2 documents throughout. SO4, which is the question paper for paper 1, and SO5, which is the question paper for paper 2 for the June 2024 exam. So in terms of what we're doing today, a brief overview of what we're going to cover. The content of today comes from those 2 examiner reports, SO2 and SO3. So we're looking at paper 1 and paper 2 because it's exam insights, so we're not touching on the coursework. If your students took the R paper, the regional paper, the feedback for that is on the Pearson website. So mostly today we're focusing on the main paper, but there are a lot of things, of course, that will be common to the R paper, and you can download the specific R paper reports, as I said, from the Pearson website. So we're looking at paper 1 and paper 2, analysis of the questions, summary support and future events, and obviously there's your opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So in terms of what we're looking at in this very quick hour, we're looking at feedback on the performance of candidates for this exam series that's just gone, the May-June series. We're going to think about candidate performance on different questions, explore achievement at different levels, and really looking at those key points from the examiner report, and of course, any common issues. So a quick overview of paper 1 and paper 2. What we're going to be looking at are the popular text and questions. So the most popular anthology question was question 3, which was compare the ways the writers present being alone in 2:30 and one other poem from the anthology. The most popular prose text was, again, Of Mice and Men. There was pretty much a balance across those 2 questions there. Obviously, students choose one of the 2 questions. So the question 6 was obviously about Curly, and the question 7 was on Of Mice and Men. The second most popular text was To Kill a Mockingbird, and Things Fall Apart was the third favourite. Still very few entries for the Joy Luck Club, but a number of responses to the Whale Rider have increased in this series, and you'll find all those points in the examiner report. Just a reminder, or in case you didn't know this, there are 2 more prose texts being added. These will be for first assessment in May 2026, so they're for first teaching in this September. The sample assessment materials and the specimen papers have been updated. There are links there on this slide. That's in SO1 of your pack. We're going to support those with knowledge organisers, a teacher guide, and a scheme of work. They're going to be available next month at some stage, mid to late October, on the Pearson website. But those 2 new texts are Clara and the Sun and Western Lane. So just a bit of excitement there that no texts are being taken away, but 2 more are being added. So that's just a little bit of information. Okay, so moving on to paper 1. We're going to look at some comments from the examiner report All of these are from page 3 of the examiner report, if you're following along with that. And they show basically that in the main, the examiners felt candidates were very well prepared for the exam. But they also highlight a little bit about what candidates didn't do as well. So candidates that did well in the poetry sections thought about the deeper meaning of the poem. They explored language, form and structure skillfully. They analysed language, form and structure together rather than in separate paragraphs. So in terms of what candidates did well in the prose section, I always call this, by the way, the 20, 30, 40 paper. In the prose section, they used short embedded quotations, had a good knowledge of the context and how it impacted the text, and they weaved the context into the essay rather than bolting it on at the end. And they answered the question clearly. So that's what candidates did well. What did they do less well? They had less knowledge of the text. They used long quotations or provided narrative, descriptive responses. And they bolted on too much context at the beginning or at the end of paragraphs. It's that sort of the candidate who does the mini history lesson, if you like, tends to be less successful. So these are big picture. We are going to go into more depth. So in terms of paper 2 for AO1 and AO2, these again are from page 3 of the examiner report for paper 2. AO1 was a strong feature of both sections A and B, with most responses demonstrating at least sound understanding, knowledge and understanding of the text studied. For AO2, discussion was varied across responses, with some candidates exploring language, form and structure in a comprehensive manner, while others might just have commented on the effects of particular words or phrases in the text. A number of level 4 responses were seen, with thorough application of analytical detail and a convincing critical style. At level 5, some very impressive responses were seen that used deep understanding of analytical approaches to perceptively respond to the question. So that's AO1 and AO2 for paper 2. For AO4, in section B, the literary heritage section of the paper, some candidates performed very well, integrating relevant and purposeful detail about the influence of context into their answers to fully support the points being made. Others front-loaded context with a paragraph at the start or perhaps an add-on or afterthought to their essay, and this tended to be the less successful approach. Some candidates did not include any reference to aspects of context at all. It's worth noting that literary context is valid as an approach, for example, the reference to tragedy, genre, literary motifs alongside social, cultural, and historical context. It's seeing context as quite widely. So those are our big picture bits of feedback, bits of overview, if you like. We're now going to have some top level points. So we're now going to move on to look at detail of the paper, the assessment objectives and the questions. So we're going to delve here into how students of different abilities responded to the questions and the requirements of the mark scheme. So very logically, we're going to start with paper 1, section A, and we're going to work our way through. So this section A is obviously the unseen poetry. You're going to see now on the left-hand side the poem that was chosen by the principal examiner. It was an unfinished poem by Barry Wade. And the question asked candidates to explore how the writer presents nature in this poem. In your answer, you should consider the writer's descriptive skills, choice of language, use of form and structure. Support your answer with examples from the poem. Now, again, we're just looking at some of the comments here from the examiner report. So we're on page 5 of the examiner report. Just give you a second to remind yourself there of the poem before we go on to look at how less successful candidates responded. So just 5 seconds to kind of just quickly scan the poem and remind yourselves of that. So less successful candidates were able to access the meaning of the poem, so the narrative of it. They discussed the connection between humanity and nature, with nature being celebrated in the poem. But they were limited to basic ideas about nature as beautiful and as existing in a cycle without any depth or detail of analysis. So how did more successful candidates respond? They were able to explore the significance of structure and how the cyclical structure tied to the poem's title. They were able to look at how structure and language intertwined, with a focus on the repetitive nature of the poem and the enjambment. They explored a wider range of points, and their responses were balanced across language and structure. And they supported their explorations with detailed analysis and judiciously selected textual evidence. Now, in the examiner report, there are 4 exemplars from levels 2 to 5. So if you want to look at, obviously we're only on for an hour today, but if you want to look at different levels of achievement, there are those exemplars there with the commentaries and the examiner tips that will support you in teaching approaches to unseen poetry. So that's our 20-mark question. So moving on to section B now, the anthology. We're going to have a little look now at question 2. So the question here was reread, half-cast, and remember. Compare the ways the writers express their feelings in half-cast and remember. You should make reference to language, form, and structure. Support your answer with examples from the poems. So we've got a bit of an exemplar. It is just an extract in the middle of the screen here. This is an extract from a level 4 response. You will find it in the examiner report, which is SO2. So I just saw that you joined a bit late. If you just scroll up, you'll find the link to the resources is available in the chat. It's just above where you've typed that. So SO2 is the examiner report. And what we're looking at, what's going to appear now on the screen, is from page 22 of that examiner report. So this is the little extract you've got there is a level 4 response. So many candidates demonstrated a keen awareness of elements such as tone, theme, figurative language, rhythm, stanzas, structure, and enjambment. These students were able to provide detailed and insightful analysis, which contributed to their higher marks. Candidates were able to produce effective comparisons in terms of language, form, and structure, with the best candidates providing a detailed analysis of the sonnet and free verse and relating form to meaning. Weaker responses offered what seemed almost notes on the poem without development. And a few responses were brief and, though valid, failed to expand their arguments and points. They wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs giving a narrative overview of the poems, which meant even less discussion. So that's a little bit of feedback on specifically about question 2 on half-cast and remember. So moving on now to question 3. The question here, again, is reread half-past 2. Compare the way the writers present being alone in half-past 2 and one other poem from the anthology. And then the signposting, of course, you should make reference to language, form, and structure. Support your answer with examples from the poems. Now, this little extract again from a student response is in the examiner report. It's a very small extract from a level 3 response. So the most popular comparison was HuffPost 2 with hide and seek, where the loneliness of childhood events was explored. Candidates often created a comparison between the two poems without focusing directly on loneliness, especially when looking at hide and seek, where they tended to explore childhood in general. War photographer was also a popular choice, with the sense of being separated from the world and unable to communicate their innermost thoughts to others through words. And the most successful candidates intertwined both structural and language analysis between both poems in a fluid manner. So you'll find these, if you're following along in that examiner report, you'll find those on page 29 of the examiner report. So that's the few insights into section B, the anthology poetry. So we're going to move on now to the last section of paper 1, which is section C. Obviously the prose text. There are obviously a lot of text in this section. Obviously in this 1 hour, we haven't got time to go through all of them. So we're going to focus on Of Mice and Men and To Kill a Mockingbird, as those are the two most popular texts for this section of the paper. There are, of course, exemplars in the examiner report, which is SO2 in your download. So the first one we're going to look at is question 5 from To Kill a Mockingbird. This question was about Calpurnia. So we're just going to have a little look at some responses to this. The comments are from page 42, and obviously from results on Results Plus, you always get that examiner tip, which are very good for teaching these responses. So the majority of candidates understood the role of Calpurnia in the text in terms of a focus on Lee using her to present race relations in America. A number of students engaged with evidence tied to Walter Cunningham's visit to the house and Calpurnia taking Jem and Scout to church. On rare occasions, the range of evidence was not strong, with students making more general comments about her character across the whole text. And the variety of social historical context was largely pleasing, with strong reference to the racism and the role of women within the society. The examiner response, the response should be driven by evidence from the text, but remember to include contextual comment in support of the points made. Those are just two of the points that could be made. There are, of course, many others that could be made about Calpurnia, such as how she acts as a mediator between the different communities, and Atticus making sure that she is seen as an integral and important member of the family. In many ways, of course, she's presented as an equal to Alexandra in the eyes of the children. She is, of course, a key figure in shaping how Scout responds to the community, teaching her about respecting others, and her being, a mother figure to Scout. That she's using those familiar terms such as baby and honey and so on. So all of those, but obviously we don't have space on the slide to put everything. So moving on to Of Mice and Men. Okay, a question there about the N word. Of course, they can just put N. It is a quotation, so they can put the word. Obviously, it's in quotation marks. We're not condoning the use of the word, of course. It is in the text, though. So we do see, in terms of responses, a variety of ways of approaching that. Then some use N and stars. It's however you feel comfortable, really, in teaching that. Obviously, we're not by any means saying it's it's an acceptable word, but it is a quotation from the text. So the question here on Of Mice and Men, question 7, is in what ways is death important in Of Mice and Men? So this exemplar on the slide here is in the examiner report. It's a little extract of a level 3 response. We're looking now at page 57, and the results plus box is from page 61. So those students who had a more discerning approach explored death in relation to Steinbeck's intentions regarding the futility of community, life, and dreams. Most students tended to hop from character to character, or various plot moments explaining why death is important, but more able candidates perceptibly explored this in relation to context, which was well established throughout most essays. More successful candidates explored the idea of symbolic death, such as the American dream, marriage, hope, the nuclear family, so not literal death, but much took a more symbolic approach. However, some less successful candidates only made very tenuous links with death and went off on tangents that suited other themes but did not necessarily answer the question. Social historical context was generally well covered in this, as through looking at death, candidates were able to explore the ranch as a microcosm, social Darwinism, factors surrounding mental illness in the 1930s, the role of women, all of those kind of things. This seemed to be a very accessible question. Candidates analysing the theme of death from the mouse to Lenny. Some very strong candidates wrote about spiritual, metaphorical death, as well as literal. Of course, lots talked about foreshadowing and the dog and all of those kind of things. So that's an overview, if you like, of paper 1. So we're going to move on now to paper 2. Now, of course, paper 2, this is an exam insight session today. Paper 2, just a reminder, sits against paper 3, the coursework route, but this isn't feedback on coursework. There is some coursework training coming up for those of you who use that route through this paper. So paper 2 is modern drama and literary heritage texts. All the comments we're going to see today are from the examiner report. The full report, of course, is SO3 in your download pack for today, and the question paper for the exam route is SO5 in your download from today. So as with paper 1, section C, there are a lot of texts to cover here, so we're not going to do all of them because we don't have time to do all of them. These next slides pull out comments from a question on a view from the bridge and an inspector calls. Those two, and inspector calls tends to be the favourite text for this section of section A of paper 2. We're obviously looking here at assessment objective 1 and assessment objective 2. So this is an extract from for question 2, and the question 2 question here was, at the time the play is set, men were expected to behave in certain ways. Explore the roles of men in A View from the Bridge. And then we have the signposting, of course, to the AO2, which is you must consider language, form, and structure in your answer. So this is an extract from page 8 of the examiner report. So the question was generally well answered. Many successful responses contrasted the behaviour of characters such as Eddie and Marco with the less stereotypical behaviour of Rodolfo. There were many different points made in relation to AO2, including the descriptive language used to describe Marco's masculine features, contrasted with the presentation of Rodolfo. So moving on to an inspector calls, which was question 3. And we're now on page 12 of the examiner report. So I might give you a bit of time in a moment to find that. But the question here in the June 2024 exam paper was, the Burlings place more importance on their family name than on relationships with each other. Discuss the significance of family in an inspector calls. And again, that signposting to AO2, you must consider language, form and structure in your answer. So this is a level 3 answer. It's on pages 13 to 15 of the examiner report. I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to find that. Just a minute or two to make sure you've got that examiner report to hand. The examiner tip here is, if there is a quotation in the question, candidates are able to use this as stimulus for their answer, perhaps as a starting point. And here, of course, we did have a quotation for this question 3 in the June paper. So some points from the examiner report, and obviously page 12 of the examiner report will give you, from there onwards, will give you a lot more points than we're covering today, but some quick overviews here. At the very least, candidates were able to consider some of the relationships within the family, such as the relationship between Eric and his father, Mr. Burling. And of course, that's a very obvious one, isn't it? That he's not the kind of father somebody can talk to. Be a very good quotation for students to have used in this question. The more successful responses considered how a number of characters in the play seemingly care more about maintaining their standing in society than they do about fostering loving relationships within the family. And of course, we've got the obvious older Burlings versus younger Burlings going on here. Lots of things that candidates could talk about. For AO2, there was some focus on Mr. Burling's belittling of the younger generation, the lack of concern in the language of both Mr. and Mrs. Burling about the consequences of their actions on Eva Daisy, along with the role reversal of Eric and Sheila in contrast to their parents. So that whole generational thing, the fact that the younger generation change at the end and how their parents treat them at the end, and how, that obvious thing about Sheila and the way she talks to her mother at the beginning, mummy, and mother at the end. We all know those kind of things that candidates could have talked about for this section of the paper. So moving on now to paper 2, section B, obviously the literary heritage section of the paper 2. And we're going to have a little look at question 12, which was the Romeo and Juliet question, and at question 14, which was the Macbeth question. Those are probably the two most popular texts in this section of the paper. There are lots of other texts, of course. We're looking, this is the examiner report SO5. We're looking now, these comments that we're going to talk about are on page 58 of the examiner report. But the question for Romeo and Juliet was, in what ways does Shakespeare use humour in Romeo and Juliet. And of course, the signposting to AO2, you must consider language, form, and structure. And then that is always followed by the signposting to AO4 and refer to the context of the play in your answer. So we've got AO1, AO2, and AO4 being assessed in section B of paper 2. So we've got that little bit of extract there, and we've got some points on the right-hand side, but there are, of course, more points in the examiner report. Points for AO1 tended to focus on Mercutio's jovial mocking of Romeo, the nurse's bawdy humour, of course that's a part that students often enjoy in this text, and the humour of Samson and Gregory. The more successful responses did not just identify examples of humour in the play, but considered how Shakespeare uses humour, such as Mercutio's finding humour even when he is dying, which changes the tone of the play to a much more serious one. Some very good bits of AO2 there as well as AO1. The question provided candidates with many opportunities to address AO2, particularly when considering the different types of humour in the play, contrasting the humour of the nurse with that of Mercutio, for example. And for AO4, candidates were able to consider the appeal of humour in the play, particularly for the audience at the time the play was first staged, and how Shakespeare used humour in his tragedies. And of course, one of the contextual points they can always make is how it was received then and now. Is there a change in that? It's a really nice question. Candidates seem to enjoy engaging in that idea of different types of humour in the play. For the Macbeth question, the question here, but we're now looking, this is part of a level 2 response, so it's not a particularly good response. This is in response to question 14, and the question here was, how does Shakespeare present Duncan and his son Malcolm in the play? You must consider language, form, and structure, and refer to the context of the play in your answer. So the examiner tip here, successful responses integrate points on context throughout, rather than bolting it on, putting in the context where it naturally occurs. So as I said, this is a level 2 response, so quite low level, but you'll find a response to question 13 also on there. That's a level 5 one in the examiner report. You'll also find on page 78 a Merchant of Venice essay that this context comment from the results plus is obviously common across all of the literary heritage texts. So here, the more successful responses provided equal discussion of Duncan and Malcolm. The less successful responses tended to focus on the presentation of Duncan with minimal consideration of Malcolm. And of course, that's I'm just looking at the moderator has lost internet access. I'm just going to need to stop and reshare the presentation in a moment, but I'll just read through this slide first. Duncan, of course, disappears very early on in the play, and then we have Malcolm. We have the whole thing about the double bluff and how Malcolm behaves when Macduff goes to England. We've got Malcolm as king and his, how he treats people at the end of the play. So that an uneven presentation isn't going to work too well. The question provided candidates with the opportunity to explore AO2 in depth. For example, many candidates considered the language used by Malcolm when he tested Macduff's loyalty and how Malcolm's language mirrors that of his father. For AO4, many responses concentrated on the significance of the divine right of kings and how the interruption of the order resulted in disturbances in the animal kingdom and the weather. You know, there were lots, of course, as well about the great chain of being and all of those things. The more successful responses integrated points for AO4 to fully support and develop points made in relation to AO2 and AO4. So having got to the end of that one, just bear with me a moment while I I'm just going to stop the presentation for a moment and host the moderator and then come back to the presentation. So please bear with me. Okay, so sorry about that little interruption there. So that was a very quick run through of the main insights for the two exam papers for each of the sections of paper 1, the 20, 30, 40 paper, the unseen, the anthology, and the prose, and then for paper 2, the two sections of that paper, section A, the modern drama, and section B, the literary heritage. Now, obviously, we haven't had time to cover all of the text for each of those, sections of the prose for paper 1 and these two sections for paper 2. But there is much more in the examiner report, the two examiner reports, which you had available there for download. And just a reminder that they were, examiner report for paper 1 was SO2, where you'll find a huge range of exemplars with commentaries on all of those that can form your benchmark scripts if you're going to be using these particular papers from mocks or whatever this year. And SO3 for paper 2. Okay, so we're going to move now to a quick summary of these papers, a little bit about support and a little bit about where to find future events. So in terms of paper 1, these are some bullet points from the back of those examiner reports. There were some comments here about reminding students to write their responses in the correct area of the answer booklet. Doesn't matter which order the students answer their exam paper, but it is important they answer them in the correct space. There should be ample space in the answer booklet, even for the largest handwriting, so they shouldn't really be asking for extra paper. So that's just a couple of little other notes that were from the examiner report. But in terms of the main summary, candidates should be aware of which assessment objectives are being assessed and that context is only assessed on paper 1 in section C on their prose text, on that 40 marker. For sections A and B, candidates must explore language, form and structure of the poems. For section B, anthology, candidates need to consider language, form and structure. Poems must be compared and the effect on the reader considered. Context is not assessed in section A or section B. So not in the unseen, obviously, because they haven't seen it before, but not assessed in section B, although they might know something about the context. It's not being assessed in those anthology poetry responses. For section C, the prose section, candidates should draw on their knowledge of the text that they have studied and give examples from different areas so that to show that they have studied the whole book. Candidates should prove to the examiner that they really do know the whole novel. For section C, prose, examples can be particular references to other parts of the novel, such as events, episodes, character, action, and so on that are relevant to the question. Candidates can paraphrase quotations. Exact quotations are not mandatory, so it's not a question of remembering 50 quotations, particularly because paper 1 is obviously a closed book exam. The assessment objective assesses the candidate's knowledge of the text and not language, form, and structure. So it's about them stepping back and really showing that they know that text and what happens in it. So you'll find more comments in that summary at the back of the examiner report for paper 1 as well. In terms of paper 2, again, this is a summary from the back of the examiner report. Make sure that the time is split equally between the two questions, 45 minutes for each of those, so that they don't kind of penalize themselves by having a very, very short response in which they haven't been able to explore the text in full. A brief plan at the start could help candidates to think about the range of points they're able to make on their chosen question. Remember, it is the understanding in relation to the assessment objectives that's being assessed, not grammar and spelling. So AO1 and AO2 for section A, and AO1, AO2, and AO4 for section B. Find examples from across the text to support a point, which can help to develop ideas. The use of literary terminology can help to ensure focus on the AO2, that's the language, form, and structure. The point evidence explain approach can help to ensure a mark in level 3 at least is achieved. And remember to make relevant points in relation to context, AO4, for section B, the literary heritage section of that exam paper. So those are some brief helpful hints really for students. Just a few bits in relation to support from Pearson. So we have, of course, access to scripts, that free online portal which allows teachers to look at student responses. Obviously, I think that closes tomorrow because it's open in that window for reviews of marking. But it does allow you to look at your student responses on the day, on results day, and to it's self-service. You can look at that. It's free of charge. It's available for all our qualifications, and it's in Edexcel online, which you should have a link to, and you should be able to get into. So hopefully that's been of great use to you during this little window between results day and now. So that's there to support you. We've also got, of course, the Results Plus, that analytical tool, which gives you a detailed breakdown of your student performance for each question. It helps you to identify topics and questions where students are perhaps doing less well. So you might be able to look and think, okay, next year I need to do a little bit more teaching on unseen or on anthology or on prose or whatever. You can look at your classes across your schools. You can benchmark your school against other Pearson schools in your country. You can look at boys against girls. You can put in exam results. There are lots and lots of things you can do there. You can get it's obviously a free account. There are little videos and things available to show you how to use that. as a platform as well. Of course, another free platform is the Exam Wizard platform, that free tool for teachers that help you make homework assignments, topic tests, mock exams, and so on. You've got questions there that are tagged against units. Of course, for this English literature, you can make your own papers from there, so that students don't double guess which paper you're going to use for their mock. The most recent exam papers are there for the first. That's where you can find them. So there are lots of things available for you on that Exam Wizard platform. Now, I think most of you will probably know Claire Haviland, who's the subject advisor. Claire is the fount of all knowledge. So if you're doing our English language GCSE specifications for EA or for EB, Claire is the person to go to for any questions about that. If you're doing our home GCSE 1EN, or I'm just trying to think of the course code for the uplift spec, but if you're doing any of our home GCSEs, any of our international GCSEs, if you're doing international A-level, or if you're doing the ordinary A-level, Claire is the person to go to. So you've got her phone number on this slide, you've got her email address. You can sign up for her regular updates, and they will tell you any updates to the specification, any new materials that are available on the website. Or you can book an appointment with her to talk through anything. So any questions after today's training, she is the person to go to. She responds very, very quickly to emails and things as well. In terms of finding out about other courses, yep, Jessica, yep, just pop the question into the chat and I'll answer that for you. That's great. You can go to this hyperlink, which will tell you of any courses coming up. As I mentioned earlier, there is coursework training coming up. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. So is it necessary for students to use exact quotations from Of Mice and Men? No, they will not be penalised for paraphrasing. We're looking at their knowledge of the text. It's a closed book exam, paper 1, section C. So, you know, that if you're talking about, for example, when Candy's old dog is shot, then you're talking about an event from the text. It doesn't have to be an exact quotation. I hope that helps. You're paraphrasing an event. Or, you know, when Curly's wife appears at Crooks's door, you know, it doesn't have to be an exact quotation. No, they won't be penalised for paraphrasing. It's one of the ways, of course, they have of showing their knowledge of the whole text, rather than the fact that they've just learned a great number of quotations, which may or may not be relevant to the actual question asked on the day, of course. Okay, so any other questions? Yeah, this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but obviously everything that I've talked about today is there for you in the examiner reports. But this was just a quick summary of those. I'll just leave this open to see if there are any other quotations. Hopefully that was helpful, just to give you a quick 1-hour oversight into the insights from the June 2024 paper. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'm going to pass back to the moderator to close the event. So thank you all very much for attending. Lots of other training coming up there. You'll find there on the Pearson website. Things about meeting the assessment criteria and coursework are ones we certainly have coming up in the next few weeks. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to the moderator.